Ark Survival Evolved has been boosted on Switch 2 for a while now, due to a dedicated patch, not a separate game version, that unlocked the in-place 30 FPS cap to allow for up to 60 FPS, with a boosted resolution. So let's take a look. Can it actually be a smooth experience unlike what the original Switch delivers here? For these comparisons, I just wanted to note I've turned off light bloom, as it is pretty excessive and I wanted the video to be more watchable. Anyways, graphically there's not much to note. Most settings seem to be like for like between the two consoles, including the noticeably rigid level of detail setup. For example, settings matched between the two include texture resolution, effects, models, and so on. However, shadows have been improved and do appear sharper and more detailed on Switch 2, which is a nice little bonus. Both consoles output the game at 1080p, but the internal resolution setups differ quite a bit. Switch 1 utilizes dynamic resolution scaling and is commonly found around the 648 to 756p area using TAAU, per my own testing and Digital Foundry's findings, who you should subscribe to if you haven't already. However, it can go as low as 594p in the most intensive situations. On the other hand, Switch 2, from what I can tell, is using a fixed resolution in the area of 864p-ish. Ultimately, in person, you can see a minor improvement in clarity, but I'm not too sure it will show itself well in a highly compressed YouTube video like this. For experiment's sake, I did end up trying out the Switch 2 at a full 1080p, but it definitely starts to struggle GPU-wise at that resolution, so I'd recommend just leaving it at the default, unless you want to fine-tune your experience yourself. Now, we've seen the quite minor graphical improvements in this patch, but how is the frame rate affected by these? Well, let's start off with a simple stroll near the first easy spawn. Here, it's quite evident that neither machine is handling the situation well. Switch 1 is not too far from its target, but almost never hits it. On the other hand, Switch 2 is delivering a 40 to 50 FPS experience, mostly hitting that mid-40s area. However, this is admittedly a pretty simple one-to-one comparison, so what about something a little more intensive? Well, flying over this densely populated swampland sees similar results at first, but Switch 1 quickly descends into a 20 FPS experience, and can go even lower. It seems the faster traversal is taxing the system much more, along with the extra load of spawning in creatures as we fly over. Sparser locations do perform better in these sorts of tests though, so your mileage will definitely vary depending on the scene. But I suspect a large portion will be wanting to join servers for this game, so I jumped in an official one to see how they perform. First up was Switch 1 with this especially rough set of player builds, causing multiple complete game freezes, locking the game up for full seconds each. This is a particularly extreme example, mostly due to how many creatures are here, but it shows how bad it can sometimes get. Moving over to Switch 2, and I couldn't find the exact area, so it's obviously not a fully comparable test, but walking around these player-built bases does drop the FPS into the 20s, which is quite a bit lower than what we've seen on the platform so far. Though it's important to note, I didn't experience any full freezes like on the original console, causing the experience of running through these locations to be much smoother. So if you're into playing on servers, it's decently improved, but still far from perfect. However, within the in-game settings, you're given the option to turn off shadows completely. Across both consoles, I only found a minor improvement here, which may just be within margin of error anyways. Now this is likely due to the dinosaurs being in the scene, causing a CPU-related bottleneck. And to further show the limits of the game on this hardware, I dropped the output resolutions using commands on both to just 540p to relieve stress off the GPU. And as you can probably tell, this resolution looks pretty bad. Overall, I found when dropping frames, Switch 2 is CPU limited in 90% of cases. GPU limitations can occur, but only account for some of the more minor dips in performance. Unfortunately, this basically means we can't solve the FPS drops with base level commands, such as just changing internal resolutions, so we're stuck with the unstable performance. Hi, it's post-video me here, and I just wanted to pop in and say I've been playing Ark a little bit more in handheld mode, and I did find that it's mostly GPU limited, so if you want to change resolutions or settings, you can actually squeeze out a bit more performance in the handheld cases. Anyways, back to the video. Real quick, before we finish up with framerate testing, I just wanted to showcase running the Switch 2 at 100% resolution scale, so a native 1080p experience, highlighted on the right, against the original setup on the left. As you can see, some scenes can perform similarly, but others definitely start to push the console a little more than I'd like. For example, in this scene where we see a 20 FPS drop just from increasing that resolution. So as I said before, I would just recommend keeping it at the default, even just to save you messing around with commands. General notes on performance though, I think both deliver a pretty unstable experience. Though I do think the Switch 2 update involving unlocking the frame rate is a good step in the right direction and can definitely feel a lot better in the simpler areas. But if I'm being honest, I can't help but feel a little disappointed at just how variable the FPS can be. Now onto loading speeds between the two. In general, this version of Ark is much better optimized for loading speeds in comparison to the PC version. Switch 2 here more than halves the time it takes to load into the world on Switch, taking only 10 seconds compared to 22, so a pretty good upgrade. What makes all of these tests so interesting is the announcement that there's a port of Ark Survival Ascended in the works for Switch 2, which is basically a remaster / Unreal Engine 5 version of this game. It's much heavier to run in comparison to this version, and as such, it's been suggested that they might use frame generation to hit 30 FPS, meaning about 15 real frames. Truthfully, I don't know how that's going to go after what we've seen here, but I'm curious to see if they manage to get a fully fledged version of the game running that looks acceptable and runs decently. So I'm interested to try it out and do a video on it like this. Anyways, that's all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching as per usual. Bye!